Israel's first judge is a name almost nobody remembers, yet without him, the entire nation might have collapsed before it ever began. His story starts not with a battle cry, but with an old warrior's public dare, standing before a fortress no one wanted to touch. Caleb, 85 years old, had already claimed his mountain, but one city still resisted him: Kiriath-Sepher, the city of the book. Its walls were ancient, its gates reinforced with stone thicker than a man's arm span, and its defenders were rumored to be giants. The Anakim, descendants of legendary giants, held Kiriath-Sepher, and Israelite soldiers who had faced them before still woke from nightmares. Caleb stood before his assembled warriors and made an offer no general should ever need to make twice. "Whoever attacks and captures Kiriath-Sepher," he announced, "I will give my daughter Achsah to him as a wife." Silence followed. Men who had crossed the Jordan, who had buried friends in the wilderness, looked at the fortress and said nothing. Then from the edge of the crowd, a younger man stepped forward. His name was Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's own nephew. Nobody expected the challenge to be answered by family. Nobody expected it to be answered at all. Othniel was not a stranger to war, but Kiriath-Sepher was different. Its towers had never fallen, not once, not to anyone. He gathered a small company of fighters, men willing to climb where others refused, men who trusted a name barely known outside his own tribe. At night, they studied the walls, looking for the seam in the stone, the gate weakened by age, the blind spot the giants overlooked. Some say the city's defenders mocked the attackers from the ramparts, certain that no force that small could ever break their gate. Othniel ignored the mockery. He had watched Caleb take mountains at 85. He refused to be the nephew who hesitated. The first assault came before dawn, ladders against stone, torches thrown into the dark, and the screams of men who had never faced giants before. Kiriath-Sepher's defenders were enormous, descendants of a bloodline that had terrified an entire generation of spies 45 years earlier. But Othniel's men did not retreat. They pressed into the breach, blade against blade, while the city burned around them. It is said the fighting inside the gates lasted through the night, neither side certain who commanded the walls until the sun rose. When morning came, the banners over Kiriath-Sepher had fallen, and the giants who once ruled it lay silent in the wreckage. Othniel walked out of the ruined gate alive, wounded, and utterly transformed, from an unknown relative into a conqueror. Word reached Caleb before Othniel did. The old warrior had made a promise in front of his entire camp, and now he had to keep it. Caleb kept his word. His daughter Achsah was given to Othniel, sealing an alliance between courage and blood that no one had predicted. It was a strange wedding, celebrated in a camp still smelling of smoke, between a legendary conqueror's daughter and a nephew nobody had noticed before. But Achsah was not a passive prize. She had her father's boldness running through her, and she was about to prove it. Before the marriage was finalized, Achsah urged her new husband to ask her father for a field, land that would secure their future. Othniel hesitated, uncertain, but Achsah refused to wait on someone else's courage. She rode to her father herself. As she approached, she slipped from her donkey, a gesture of respect and urgency that immediately caught Caleb's attention. "What do you want?" her father asked, sensing that his daughter had not come merely to greet him. Achsah answered without flinching, "Give me a blessing. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." The Negev was dry, unforgiving, a gift that looked generous on paper but could starve a family without water to sustain it. Caleb understood immediately. His daughter was not asking for luxury. She was asking for survival, and she was asking boldly. He gave her the upper springs and the lower springs, securing water that would outlast them both for generations. It was a small story, folded inside a larger one, yet it revealed exactly what kind of family Othniel had married into: boldness, directness, a refusal to accept scarcity when a single honest request could change everything. Othniel had won a city with a blade. Achsah had won water with nothing but her voice and her father's love. Together, they represented something Israel desperately needed in this early chaotic season: courage that did not wait for permission. But their story, remarkable as it was, would soon be buried beneath something far darker settling over the entire nation. Joshua had died. The generation that remembered the miracles of the Jordan and the walls of Jericho was dying with him. And with that generation gone, something inside Israel began to rot, quietly, one town at a time. The book of Judges describes it bluntly. A new generation arose who did not know the Lord, nor what he had done for Israel. They looked at the gods of the nations around them, the Baals, the Asherahs, and instead of resisting, they knelt. It happened slowly enough that almost no one noticed the exact moment loyalty shifted from the God of their fathers to carved wooden poles. The Israelites intermarried with the Canaanites, adopted their festivals, borrowed their idols, and told themselves it changed nothing important. It changed everything. The text says the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he handed them over to their enemies. Their enemy this time was not a local king or a nearby tribe. He was something far more foreign and far more terrifying. His name was Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim, a land between two rivers, hundreds of miles from anything Israel called home. His very name is strange, even in Hebrew, sometimes translated as Cushan of Double Wickedness, a title that reads like a warning. No other king in the entire book of Judges carries a name built entirely around cruelty, repeated twice over. Historians still argue over exactly who Cushan-Rishathaim really was, and how a king from so far away conquered Israel so completely. What is certain is the result. For 8 years, Israel served this foreign king, paying tribute, bowing to a throne they never chose. 8 years does not sound long, until you imagine living every one of those years under an occupier's boot. Crops taken, freedoms stripped, a generation of children raised believing servitude to Aram-Naharaim was simply how the world worked. The land that had once buried giants under its own walls now buried its pride under the weight of foreign rule. And somewhere in that suffering, memory returned. Israel remembered a name they had almost let slip through their fingers. The people cried out to the Lord, the text says, the same cry that had once been ignored for generations finally found its voice again. It is a strange, humbling detail. It so often takes captivity to make people remember who set them free the first time. And when Israel cried out, the Lord did not stay silent. He raised up someone to rescue them from Cushan-Rishathaim's hand. It was not a stranger. It was not a new hero built from nothing. It was Othniel, the same man who had taken Kiriath-Sepher decades before. The city conqueror, the nephew nobody had noticed, the husband of a bold woman who once asked her father for springs, was called again. The scripture says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, a phrase used for the very first time in the entire book of Judges. Before Gideon, before Samson, before any of the more famous names, it was Othniel who first carried that description. Something changed in him, something beyond ordinary courage, something the text refuses to fully explain but insists was real. He went out to war, the text says simply, as if decades had not passed since his last battle at all. Imagine an old conqueror, grey now, stepping back into armor he thought he had set down for good, called once more to fight. Israel's ragged militia gathered behind him, men who had grown up under foreign rule, men who had never fought a real war before. Against them stood the forces of Cushan-Rishathaim, a king whose very name meant twice wicked, whose armies had crushed Israel for 8 long years. There is no detailed battle account left to us, no siege described scene by scene like the fall of Kiriath-Sepher. Just a single devastating sentence. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into his hand, and Othniel prevailed against him. An empire that had humiliated an entire nation for 8 years collapsed under a judge whose name barely survives in memory. There were no parades recorded, no monuments built in his honor, no epic poem preserved describing the final blow. Just silence and then peace. The land had rest, the text says, for 40 years until Othniel died. 40 years is a lifetime. An entire generation grew up never knowing what it meant to bow to Cushan-Rishathaim. Children born the year of that victory grew old themselves, before Israel needed another judge to rise and rescue them again. And through all of it, Othniel is barely given more than a handful of verses in the entire Bible. Compare that to Samson's chapters, Gideon's fleece, David's psalms, and Othniel's 40 years of peace feels almost erased by comparison. Yet he was first to carry the Spirit of the Lord as a judge, first to prove deliverance was possible after failure, first to show that the same hands which once took a giant city could still take back an entire nation's freedom. His wife, Achsah, the woman who once slid from her donkey to demand springs of water, likely stood beside him through all of it. We are never told when she died, or what she thought watching her husband become the pattern for every judge who followed him. But without her boldness, without her father's mountain-conquering example, would Othniel have ever answered Caleb's dare in the first place? Every part of this story is built from people refusing to wait quietly for someone else to act first. Caleb dared. Othniel answered. Achsah demanded. And decades later, an entire enslaved nation cried out instead of staying silent. Each act of boldness fed into the next, until a forgotten nephew became the first name in a book meant to record deliverance after deliverance. It is worth asking why Scripture buries such an important pattern in so few verses, almost as an afterthought before Ehud's story begins. Perhaps because the point was never Othniel's fame. The point was that anyone, even someone barely named, could carry the Spirit of the Lord. Cushan-Rishathaim's empire, whatever it truly was, vanishes from history books almost as completely as Othniel's own name vanished from popular memory. Two names, one utterly forgotten as a villain, one utterly forgotten as a hero, locked together in a single sentence of Scripture. Kiriath Sefer itself, the city of the book, later became known as Debir, its ruins still debated by archaeologists today. Some believe its remains rest beneath modern excavation sites in the southern hills of Israel, still holding secrets from that first siege. And the springs Achsah demanded, the upper and lower waters of the Negev, likely still exist somewhere beneath dry desert ground. It is strange to think a spring of water might outlast an empire, a giant city, and the memory of the man who conquered both. 40 years of peace followed Othniel's judgment, longer than almost any other judge managed to hold across the entire book. Gideon would later win a great victory and still see Israel slide back into idolatry within his own lifetime. Othniel's 40 years stood as the record, the benchmark, the proof that deliverance done right could actually hold. But peace, Scripture warns again and again, was never permanent in this era. Each judge's death reopened the same old wound. When Othniel finally died, the text moves on almost instantly, as if history itself could not wait to introduce the next crisis. Israel again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. The very next verse says, and a new oppressor was already waiting. That next oppressor was Eglon, king of Moab, and the man who would rise to stop him was a left-handed judge named Ehud. But before Ehud's dagger, before Eglon's fall, there was Othniel, the first judge, the forgotten conqueror, the man almost nobody remembers.